الله يسهل الله يسهل الله يسهل عليهم الله يسهل عليهم يعني إن شاء الله ربنا يسهل يلا معليش كمل.
Folks, that was top Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh talking about his 3 sons who were killed Wednesday in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. Now, Haniyeh's sons were all members of Hamas, and Israeli officials say they'd carried out terrorist activities in the Gaza Strip. 2 takeaways here. Number 1, like every child in Gaza, sadly, Haniyeh's sons were taught from the time they were toddlers to hate Jews and that Israel must be destroyed. Yesterday was the bitter outcome of being raised by a literal death cult. Second, Ismail Haniyeh wasn't in Gaza when he made those remarks that you just heard. He made them from Doha in Qatar. He and other top Hamas officials live there as honored guests, yet Qatar is supposedly an ally of the United States. Joining us now to break down this very confusing state of affairs is Jonathan Schanzer, Vice President of Research for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. John, great to have you with us. Hey, Qatar is a tiny country, and many people probably couldn't point it out on a map, but this oil-rich kingdom is punching above its weight in all the wrong ways when it comes to Hamas. Tell us more about it.
Sure. Well, this is a country of 330,000 people. That's all. It's tiny. Most people can't point to it on a map, as you suggested. But the thing that really makes it powerful is the fact that it has about 11% of the world's energy reserves. So it makes it incredibly wealthy with very little overhead. So this is a government that spends its money all over Washington, D.C., splashing cash in the halls of power. And it has bought influence over time. And actually, over time, it's also convinced the United States to open up its most important airbase in the Middle East, an airbase called Al Udeid. And so as that relationship has deepened, remarkably, the Qataris have also deepened their relationship with Hamas. They've allowed for dozens of Hamas leaders to be based in that country. Hamas has been providing about $30 million a month since 2018 to Hamas. They are, I would say, other than Iran, the most important patron for the Hamas terrorist organization, and yet they remain an influential American ally because of that energy and because of that airbase. And this is not something that's easily undone. But I have to say, after everything that we've seen over the last 6 months, a correction is long overdue. Washington is starting to wake up. There are some members of Congress that seem to be outraged by this, but unfortunately, the White House seems content with the status quo. The Israelis are not happy either, though.
Yeah, John, and speaking of which, on Capitol Hill in the Senate, legislation being pushed trying to remove Qatar from being classified as a major non-NATO ally. Take a look at what Senator Ted Budd had to say.
I believe it's time for our nation to re-examine who we can count on to be on our side and who stands on the side of the terrorists. The state of Qatar, for example, hosts Hamas leaders in the capital of Doha. Now, initially, Qatari officials claimed that they were exercising leverage on Hamas. They publicly stated thereafter that they don't have any leverage. And now they're promoting a ceasefire regardless of the release of the hostages. After 6 months, the patience of the United States has run out.
Now, John, you and your organization, FDD, have been sounding the alarm on this for years. It's nice to finally see some help coming from Capitol Hill. What are your thoughts on this legislation?
I love it. I think we should be cutting off the Qataris. They should not be a major non-NATO ally. They should not be hosting this airbase, by the way. They should not be recognized as a legitimate country. I think, if anything, the State Department ought to turn around and slap them with the state sponsor of terrorism designation so that there's no difference between the Qataris and the Iranians. This is, I think, what's coming to the regime there in Doha. Now, I'm not sure that we're going to see everything move in exactly the same direction that we'd like it to see, but I do think that it's a positive sign that Senator Budd has taken this up. We know that other members of Congress have also taken this up. It's going to take a little time, but the pressure will build.
Yeah, John, we have about 30 seconds left. Qatar's role in those hostage negotiations, before we go to the break real quick, nefarious role in those negotiations?
Absolutely insane. If you're giving Hamas $30 million a month and you're giving them a headquarters, there's no way you should be an honest broker in these discussions about the hostages. Just insane.
Yeah, and Israel cannot be happy about that, of course. Hey, John, coming up after the break, we want to break down the Israel-U.S. relationship, the Biden administration. You mentioned the White House. Can the Biden administration be trusted to stand with Israel as tensions grow with Iran? Much more after the break with John Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Don't move. Welcome back to Stackleback tonight. As we said at the top of the show, Israel and Iran may be on the road to an all-out war that could light the Middle East up even more than it has been over the past few months. Where would the Biden administration, where would the United States stand if such a conflict breaks out? President Biden has seemed to have some very conflicting views on that. Take a look at some recent comments from him.
So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security.
Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is back with us. John, that seems to be sort of a schizophrenic policy, I guess you could say, on the part of the White House. On one hand, condemning the Israeli government, and in the next breath saying, hey, we've got Israel's back. Are those optics problematic when we think of Israel's enemies and what they're taking from the White House?
I think it's been problematic up until now. I think we are at an interesting crossroads, Eric. I mean, the concern that I think we're seeing out of the White House is primarily about Gaza civilians, right? That they're concerned about 1.4 million people that are displaced, that are sitting in Rafah right now. They were pushed from the north of Gaza to the south as the Israelis swept through. And, you look at it now, everyone is pinched in there into Rafah, this town right on the border with Egypt. And that's where the concern is right now, that there's not enough assistance getting through. And there may be some truth to that. I don't see anything that really conflicts with that. But what I think the president has signaled is that Israel, needing to cease fire entirely for 6 to 8 weeks, with Hamas giving nothing in return. That hardly seems right. And it doesn't seem like the president is pushing for a victory in Gaza, and that has not played well for Israel. You get a sense that Iran and its proxies have been cheering that on. But now, amidst threats from the regime, as the regime threatens to attack Israel, Biden is singing a different tune. He's saying, look, if you take another step toward Israel, we're going to intervene. We're going to give Israel whatever it needs to counter your threats and to attack you in response. And I think that's an important distinction here. He's standing with Israel in terms of direct threats from major powers like Iran, but he's also asking the Israelis to try to ease the suffering of Gazans. This is, I think, how we should be dissecting it right now. I'm not sure it's entirely coherent, but then again, I'm not sure that this administration has been for the last, let's say, 2 months.
Good point. Do you think that the enemies of the United States and Israel hear the president's comments when he says, look, we will steadfastly stand with Israel? John, do you think that they believe there's actual teeth behind those remarks, that the U.S. will actually follow through there?
I don't know. I think that the U.S. has taken its lumps in the Red Sea. We've taken, shots from Iranian proxies. We lost, 3 service members in late January, and the U.S. response has been middling at best. This has not been America's finest hour. We're certainly not baring our teeth, and we're not showing our strength. But this would be the moment, right, that the U.S. has, for a very long time, for 7 decades, said that we would stand with the Israelis in the event of a major war along these lines from a power like Iran. So this is, with the president saying this unequivocally, this could be the moment that forces Iran to pause. But I have to say, I don't see much of a difference between a strike coming out of Iran or a strike coming out of Syria or Yemen. It's all, the weapons are all coming from the same place. The fighters are trained in the same place. Iran is behind all of this, and it's really a distinction without much of a difference.
Yeah, the head of the snake. And John, it seems like Israel now is in a different place in terms of a response. Of course, the takeout last week of Zahedi. Do you expect a pretty forceful Israeli response to any Iranian strike or provocation?
I see them going all out here. I mean, I think especially with the president telling them that they have their hands tied in Gaza, which is the war that they wanted to finish. This was the war that the president promised that they would finish. Now that they are feeling like they only have one brigade left in Gaza, they pulled out an entire division. You've got a mobilized Israeli military. You've got an Israeli populace that is still on war footing, an IDF that is still looking to settle scores. So if this next attack comes out of Lebanon, I would expect there to be a serious escalation on Israel's northern border. If it comes out of Iran itself, I think we'll see an escalation in Iran itself. The IDF does not appear willing to back down right now, and I think for good reason. They've been at war for 6 months. They want Iran to stop all of this or to pay a price. And I think this does look increasingly like the moment of truth.
Yeah, October 7th changed everything in the region, and we shall see the United States posture here as well. Hey, you're in Greece right now. You're on your way to Israel, John. Come on back and let us know what you see in the world's one and only Jewish state. Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. It's always great seeing you, my friend. We'll see you again soon. And coming up after the break, my final thoughts on wars and rumors of war. Stick around.